The rain tapped against the fogged-up windows of Haven Street Diner, a small, worn-down place tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. Inside, the air smelled of sizzling bacon and burnt coffee, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes long after you left. Maggie Harper wiped her hands on her faded apron, pushing a few loose strands of chestnut hair out of her tired eyes. It had been a long shift, 12 hours on her feet, running orders, refilling coffee cups, and forcing smiles at customers who barely noticed her. But exhaustion was something she had learned to carry, just like everything else in her life. She glanced toward the cash register, where her tip jar sat almost empty. $10, maybe 12 if she was lucky. Not nearly enough to cover rent, let alone the past-due electric bill waiting for her at home. But that wasn't new. Maggie had learned from a young age that money was something that slipped through your fingers like water, no matter how hard you tried to hold on to it. What stuck, though, was kindness, the kind her grandmother had taught her when they barely had food on the table. Kindness is the only currency that never runs out, she used to say, pressing a warm biscuit into Maggie's little hands when she'd insisted she wasn't hungry. Maggie lived by those words, even when it meant going without. A quiet sigh left her lips as she glanced around the nearly empty diner. A truck driver nursed his coffee at the counter, a college kid typed away on his laptop in the corner, and the neon diner sign flickered outside, casting a soft glow against the wet pavement. It was just another night, just another shift. But Maggie had no idea that tonight, one simple act of kindness would change her life forever. As Maggie wiped down the counter, her fingers numb from the long shift, something outside caught her eye. Through the rain-spattered window, barely visible under the flickering streetlight, sat a small figure huddled near the diner's entrance. Her brows knitted together as she stepped closer, pressing her hand against the cool glass. A boy, no older than 8, sat in a wheelchair, his thin frame swallowed by an old, threadbare jacket. His dark hair clung to his forehead, soaked from the rain, while his small hands fidgeted with the frayed edges of a blanket draped over his legs. Maggie's heart squeezed. It was too cold for anyone to be outside, let alone a child. Without thinking, she grabbed a clean towel from behind the counter and pushed open the door, wincing as the cold rain hit her skin. Kneeling beside him, she draped the towel over his shoulders, her voice gentle. "Hey, sweetie, what are you doing out here all alone?" The boy looked up, his blue eyes wide and uncertain. I'm waiting for someone," he mumbled, barely louder than the rain hitting the pavement. Maggie glanced around. The street was empty. No cars pulling up, no hurried footsteps of a late parent. She sighed, shifting to block the wind from hitting him. "Well, you can't stay out here like this. Come inside with me, okay? It's warm, and I've got something special for you." He hesitated, glancing toward the street as if expecting someone to appear. But then, slowly, he nodded. Maggie gave him a reassuring smile and gently wheeled him inside, settling him at a booth near the radiator. She crouched beside him, still holding the towel in place. "I'm Maggie," she said, her voice bright. "What's your name?" "Tommy," he answered, his lips barely curling into a shy smile. "Tommy, huh? That's a strong name." She straightened, brushing her damp hands against her apron. "Now, tell me, how do you feel about grilled cheese?" His eyes flickered with something close to excitement, and she didn't wait for an answer. Minutes later, she returned with a steaming plate, a perfectly golden grilled cheese sandwich with a mug of tomato soup on the side. She placed it in front of him, tucking a napkin onto his lap. "This one's on me," she said with a wink. "Eat up, kiddo." Tommy hesitated, glancing at her before taking a careful bite. The cheese stretched in long, gooey strings, and as he chewed, his face broke into a full, beaming smile. "This is the best thing I've ever had," he whispered, his voice filled with a warmth that reached straight into Maggie's chest. She laughed, settling across from him. "Well, you've got good taste." As Tommy ate, they talked about silly things, superheroes, favorite colors, little moments that made him forget the cold, the waiting, the loneliness. Maggie didn't know it yet, but across the street, someone was watching. And what she thought was just another rainy night was about to become the beginning of something she never saw coming. Outside, the rain continued to pour, drumming softly against the sleek black Bentley parked across the street. Inside the car, Victor Grayson sat in silence, his sharp gray eyes fixed on the scene unfolding through the diner's fogged-up window. He had only meant to be gone for a few minutes, A quick phone call to handle a pressing business matter. Tommy was supposed to wait where he could see him, but when Victor returned, his son was no longer outside. Panic had surged through him for a brief second before he spotted the wheelchair inside the warm glow of the diner. And then he saw her, the waitress. Victor watched as she knelt beside Tommy, draping a towel over his small shoulders like it was the most natural thing in the world. He saw the way she smiled at him, the way she leaned in, listening as if whatever Tommy had to say actually mattered. Then came the food, hot, fresh, and offered without hesitation. Not a transaction, not charity, just a simple act of kindness. Victor's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He had spent his life surrounded by people who only did things when there was something to gain. He knew the calculated generosity of business partners, the empty politeness of high society dinners. But this woman, she didn't know who Tommy was. She had no idea that the boy sitting across from her was the son of one of the richest men in the city. And yet, she had given without expecting anything in return. Something inside Victor twisted in a way he didn't quite understand. He had built his empire on control, making sure nothing in his life, especially Tommy's, was left to chance. His son's condition had forced him to be ruthless, to hire only the best caregivers, the most experienced professionals. But none of them had ever made Tommy smile like that. None of them had ever looked at him like he was just a kid, not a responsibility or a burden to be managed. Victor exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening as he pulled out his phone. With a flick of his fingers, he dialed. "Clara," he said, his voice low but firm. "Yes, sir," came the efficient reply. "Haven Street Diner. There's a waitress inside. Brown hair, late 20s. His eyes remained locked on Maggie as she laughed at something Tommy said, completely unaware of the man watching her. "Find out everything about her. Name, address, background. I want a full report by morning." A brief pause. Clara never questioned him, but he could hear the curiosity in her silence before she simply said, "On it." Victor ended the call and leaned back in his seat, his gaze still on the diner. He had come here to pick up his son, nothing more. But now, he found himself unable to look away, unable to shake the feeling that, somehow, tonight was about to change more than just Tommy's evening. It was about to change everything. Maggie pulled her jacket tighter around herself as she trudged home, her sneakers soaked from the rain. The city was quiet at this hour, the streets slick with water reflecting the dim glow of streetlights. Her body ached from the long shift, and all she wanted was to collapse onto her lumpy couch and forget, for a little while, just how hard life had been lately. Her tips had been disappointing, as usual, and tomorrow would bring the same struggle, barely scraping by, working until her feet went numb, and hoping for something better even when she knew better than to expect it. She had just reached her apartment building when she noticed a dark figure standing near her door. Her breath caught. Nobody ever came to see her, especially not at this hour. For a moment, she considered turning around, pretending she hadn't seen him, but then he stepped forward, and the dim porch light illuminated his face. Tall, sharply dressed, his piercing gray eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "Margaret Harper?" His voice was deep, controlled, but not unkind. Maggie swallowed, gripping her keys. "Yeah, who's asking?" "Victor Grayson." He let the name settle between them, watching her carefully for a reaction. She blinked, shaking her head slightly. "Sorry, should I know who that is?" If he was surprised that she didn't recognize him, he didn't show it. "I was watching tonight," he said simply. "I saw what you did for my son." Maggie frowned. "Your son?" And then it clicked. "Tommy, he's yours?" Victor nodded. "I saw you take him in, feed him, make him feel safe. You didn't know who he was. You didn't ask for anything in return. That kind of kindness, it's rare." Maggie shifted uncomfortably, rubbing her damp sleeve against her forehead. "It was just a sandwich," she muttered. "Any decent person would have done the same." "That's where you're wrong," Victor said, his tone quiet but firm. He reached into his coat, pulling out an envelope, and held it out to her. "I don't believe in charity, Maggie, but I do believe in paying debts. And whether you realize it or not, I owe you." She stared at the envelope but didn't take it. "What is this?" "A job offer. Grayson Technologies. A real salary, 6 figures, benefits, stability." His gaze didn't waver. "I don't need another business expert. I have plenty of those. What I need is someone with a heart like yours." Maggie let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You want me, a waitress, to work at some big corporate tech company?" I don't know the first thing about any of that. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. I can teach you business. I can teach you strategy. But I can't teach people to care the way you do. That's what matters. Her fingers trembled as she finally reached for the envelope, feeling the weight of something that could change her life forever. She looked up at him, her throat tight with uncertainty. This is crazy. Maybe, Victor admitted, his lips twitching in the faintest hint of a smile. But sometimes, crazy is exactly what we need. Maggie stepped into the towering glass building of Grayson Technologies, feeling more out of place than ever. The sleek marble floors, the sharp-dressed executives moving with purpose, the quiet hum of business. None of it felt real. Just a week ago, she had been wiping down diner counters, and now she was here, carrying a company badge with her name on it. She wasn't sure if she had made the right choice, but something deep inside her told her she had to try. The first few days were overwhelming. The endless emails, the corporate jargon she didn't understand, the way people glanced at her when they thought she wasn't looking. Most of them knew her story. She was the waitress Victor Grayson had plucked from a rundown diner and placed into a world she had no experience in. Some whispered that she was nothing more than a charity case, a temporary fascination for the billionaire. Others assumed there had to be something more, some secret reason why she was here. No one believed she had earned her place. Maggie ignored the whispers and kept her head down, determined to learn. Victor had given her a mentor, an older woman named Clara who had been working with him for years. Clara was strict but fair, throwing Maggie into real projects instead of letting her sit on the sidelines. You want to prove yourself? She had said. Then work for it. And so Maggie did. She stayed late, studied reports she barely understood, and asked questions even when she felt stupid. Slowly, things started to make sense. She wasn't just the waitress anymore. She was part of something bigger. But just as she started finding her footing, everything came crashing down. One morning, the office was buzzing with tension. Employees whispered in hushed tones. Emails were flying back and forth, and even Clara looked unusually tense. Maggie finally caught a glimpse of a news alert on someone's screen. Grayson Technologies hit by internal data leak. Sensitive company secrets had been stolen and leaked to a competitor. The entire company was in crisis, and Victor was furious. Then came the whispers, the suspicious glances, the way conversations seemed to stop when Maggie entered a room. And then, Clara pulled her aside, her expression unreadable. Victor wants to see you. Maggie's stomach dropped. She didn't understand. She barely knew how to log into the company's database, let alone leak anything. But as she walked toward Victor's office, one thought kept echoing in her mind. They think it's me. Maggie stepped into Victor's office, her pulse pounding so loudly she could barely hear the sound of the rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. He stood behind his desk, his expression unreadable, but the weight of his stare made her stomach twist. The silence stretched between them until finally, he spoke. I took a chance on you, he said, his voice calm but firm. Tell me I wasn't wrong. The words hit her harder than she expected. He wasn't yelling, wasn't accusing her outright, but the disappointment in his tone was worse. Maggie swallowed the lump in her throat, forcing herself to stand tall even as her chest ached. I didn't do this, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Victor, I swear, I don't even understand half the systems here, let alone how to leak company secrets. You have to believe me. He studied her for a long moment, his sharp eyes searching for any sign of a lie. Then, slowly, he nodded. Then help me find out who did. Relief flooded through her, but there was no time to dwell on it. Over the next few hours, Maggie and Victor worked side by side, sifting through reports, email logs, and security footage. She wasn't a tech expert, but she had something else, instinct. And something about the way certain files had been accessed didn't sit right with her. Then, she found it. A tiny detail most people would have overlooked, a pattern in the logins that pointed to someone inside the company. Someone high up. A name Maggie recognized, not because she had worked with him, but because he had been one of the loudest voices against her since she arrived. Victor's jaw tightened when he saw the evidence. James Holloway, he muttered, his eyes darkening. I should have known. By the end of the day, the truth was out. James had framed Maggie to cover his own tracks, leaking information to a rival company for personal gain. Victor fired him on the spot, and when the dust settled, he turned back to Maggie. You proved me right, he said, his voice softer now. I was never wrong about you. Years passed, and Maggie was no longer the waitress struggling to make ends meet. She had climbed higher than she ever thought possible, now a top executive at Grayson Technologies. The same halls where people once whispered about her had become a place where she was respected, not because of where she came from, but because of what she had proven. She had worked hard, learned everything she could, and never lost the kindness that had brought her here in the first place. But some things never changed. Tommy remained a constant in her life, the boy who had unknowingly set everything into motion that rainy night at the diner. As she sat in the crowd at his high school graduation, watching him cross the stage in his cap and gown, she felt a lump rise in her throat. He had grown into a confident young man, his wheelchair never stopping him from chasing his dreams. When he spotted her in the audience, he grinned and gave her a small wave, just like he had all those years ago, sitting in that diner booth with a grilled cheese in front of him. After everything she had been given, Maggie knew she had to give back. With Victor's support, she launched a foundation in Tommy's name, helping struggling kids get the meals, education, and opportunities they deserved. She wanted every child out there, the ones sitting in the cold, waiting for someone to notice, to know that kindness could change their lives, just as it had changed hers. Victor watched from a distance, seeing the woman she had become. Powerful, respected, but still the same Maggie at heart. As she laughed with Tommy and the other graduates, he allowed himself a rare smile. He had made a lot of smart business decisions in his life, but taking a chance on Maggie Harper, that was the best one he had ever made.